In this video, I spent 100 days building a cozy farm in Minecraft. We will obviously be focusing on the farming side of Minecraft, cultivating different plants and seeds, building awesome homes for our animal friends, and discovering brand new features such as cooking, making wine, new furniture, and a large variety of crops. Just a quick note for those of you who may be interested, I decided to put out some merch and I had a cute design made just for the occasion with the blue axolotl, of course. And don't hesitate to tell me in the comments if you'd like me to add some more designs like this one with different animal facts. All that said, let's begin our awesome farming adventure. On day 0, I spawned in this huge barley field, and yeah, I clearly couldn't see much, so I blindly made my way through. Getting our first seeds was definitely a defining moment on this farming adventure, and I also spotted a horse and her foal roaming about. At the top of the hill, there was a village, so I said hello to my fellow farmer and then proceeded to steal all his crops. Yeah, I felt bad, so I planted some seeds back, but then I immediately looted his chest, so make up your mind, Tootsie. My mind was clearly made up for this next part because on top of stealing all the hay bales, I also emptied a second village chest in which I found bread, potatoes, tomato seeds, and an onion. At the bottom of the hill, I noticed a small group of horses, and I particularly liked the brown one with white spots, and oh my, these little bouncy pigs are so adorable. I punched down my first tree to make a wooden pickaxe, and then I headed back up to the village where I upgraded to stone tools. I did get a little fright with the iron golem because I didn't see that he could climb on the bush next to me, but it was all good in the end, thankfully. Now we're gonna craft ourselves a shield for a bit of midnight mob hunting. Yeah, I think that's it for the night. I should remember all I have is leather armor. On the morning of day 1, I got a little creeper surprise, and then I said hello to this brown cow next to the village. I explored the area a bit and spotted some more bouncy pigs, and I really love the one with a muddy belly. I then killed off a few extra mobs, and I came across some chickens, a goose, and some more cows, and I have to say they all looked quite awesome and fairly realistic for Minecraft, which is quite nice. Further off, I found these plants that were flowering a bit, and I realized they were actually wild carrots, so I harvested them all for the future farm. Now we still need to find a place to build our farms, so I chose this flat spot in the field because I thought it would make sense having the village in close proximity in case I need to do some trading, for example. I crafted a bucket and started clearing out all the grass and barley to be able to actually see something because, yeah, it was quite bad for the moment. On day 2, I went down in this little cave to collect some coal, and it was the perfect day to do so because a thunderstorm started, and it was kind of cozy to do some mining with the sounds of the rain and the thunder above. I was also able to find some iron that I would definitely need for upgrading my terrible leather armor. When I headed back up, the night had fallen, so I quickly killed a spider for string before going to bed. On day 3, I used the string I got to craft a bow, which would be handy for preventing creepers from exploding my farmland. The ground was quite uneven in some places, so I started filling up the holes with dirt. I also placed down some water to create my very first crop field. I planted the tomato seeds, and when I started planting potatoes, a funny little pig came along. He was my very first companion in this world, and I decided to name him Albert after Albert Einstein. In the afternoon, I did a bit of terraforming, and I also went to chop down some wood for crafting fences. I started building a little pen for Albert, and I even found him a friend that I named Paul. That night, I decided I would start mining down to diamond level, and I found some iron on the way as well as some caves, so I was soon able to upgrade my stone pickaxe to iron, and I also got a bit of gold. On day 4, I made my way back up to the surface and I went to check on Paul and Albert. I went to explore my surroundings and came across some wild tomato plants that I gathered, and I also said hello to this little black sheep. At one point, I kept hearing strange footsteps behind me, And when I turned around, I realized it was actually two curious pigs, intrigued by my tomatoes. To finish off the day, I looked around to find some sugarcane to be able to enchant some stuff later on. And I also found this broken portal and looted the chest. On day 5, I continued gathering some sugarcane, and then I spotted some peculiar plants growing in the water, which were actually rice. Further off, I noticed these berry bushes of some sort, and when I harvested them, I got some grape seeds, so yeah. The French girl in me could not wait to make my own wine. I also spotted an apple tree in the distance, so I collected a bunch of apples, and I also got a few pumpkins. On top of sugarcane, I also needed leather for crafting books, so I had to kill a few cows, but I made sure to leave the ones that had babies, of course. I gathered some more grape seeds, and I kept seeing loads of horses with stunning, colorful coats, and trust me, I was really looking forward to having some on the farm. I gave this mare some apples, and I promised I would come back to her once the farm was built. I was harvesting some wild onions when I noticed part of a savanna village sticking out from behind the hill. So here we've got some type of weird block, which actually turned out to be compost, and I quite enjoy gardening in real life, so I knew I definitely should collect the compost for my crops. On day 6, I found some cabbage seeds that I replaced with wheat seeds. Yeah, I'm sure the villagers won't notice. And I also took the block of rich soil because I believe crops grow quicker planted on it. I then continued my rampage on the village, but if I add some music, it makes it all okay. Once my inventory was completely full of stuff, I started making my way back home, and I saw a jungle biome in the distance, and I also continued collecting sugarcane and leather. On day 7, of course I got distracted by the biomes around me, so I explored a bit more instead of going straight home. I spotted these 2 little parrots, but I doubt they count as farm animals, so I resisted the urge to tame them. I also came across some ducks and more awesome looking horses. And then to top all this cuteness, I saw this adorable little cuttlefish, and she even played around in the water with me, which was so sweet. On a more sour note, I got some more leather, and finally I managed to make it back to the farm, though we can't really call it a farm yet, with just a random crop plot and 2 bouncy pigs. But we've got to start somewhere. I decided I would add a second crop plot for all the extra seeds I'd gathered, and when the night fell, I headed back down to do some mining. I got some lapis, and then just as I was arriving at level -57, I found 2 diamonds, which was pretty cool. I then started strip mining and I got some redstone as well as 2 diamond veins, so I was able to craft myself a diamond pickaxe, and I also had some left for crafting the enchanting table as well. On day 8, I made my way back up and planted the tomato seeds and onions, as well as the grape seeds. For the rice, I made some lines out of dirt, and I filled up the middle with water to be able to plant the crop. The next day, I added some sugarcane all around, and here is the slow evolution of the Tootsie farm, which looks absolutely awful at the moment. I needed some bricks for crafting some items, so off I went to the river to dig up some clay. I met this charming otter called Nicholas, and after my short distraction, I went back to work. I then chopped down some dark oak logs, and basically you can craft these wood poles and place the grape seeds directly on them, which looks pretty nice. On day 10, I started cooking the clay in a furnace, and I also crafted a knife. I used some iron and a brick to craft a skillet, even though we're just gonna call it a pan. And yeah, I thought I looked pretty hilarious with this huge pan that was half my size. I planted some extra grape bushes to form a sort of mini vineyard, and also collected my first grapes. So here we're gonna craft this grapevine pot, and we can place the grapes inside and then jump on them to make juice. Yeah, this part is super fun and satisfying at the same time, or maybe I'm just a weirdo. I quickly went to get some sand to smelt it into glass for making wine bottles. I used some bricks and a campfire for making a stove, And after placing the pan on it, I stepped inside it. Yeah guys, this young lady definitely needs some help. After crafting some wine bottles, I filled them up with grape juice, and as the night had come, I went back mining for diamonds. This time I didn't actually mine them, so that I could use Fortune 3 later on to get more. On day 11, I harvested some crops that had grown, and then I gave some tomatoes to Paul and Albert, and decided to name their baby Serena. I collected some more grapes, as well as a bunch of crops, and I used the pan to cook some potatoes, and honestly the cooking additions are quite fun. After that, I replanted loads of carrots, potatoes and wheat seeds, and finally I terraformed the land a bit more. On day 12, I spent most of my time filling up holes and terraforming the terrain, and then I chopped down a few dark oak trees and headed to the flowering oak biome on the other side of the village to get some saplings to plant next to my farm. When I came back, I cleared out some extra dirt that was in the way and also flattened out the area where I would be building my future farmhouse. With the wood I had collected, I crafted some fences to build an enclosure to start bringing back some extra animals. I found a couple of sheep, so I led them back to the farm, but I made sure to keep only the white ones because I was planning on making the walls of the farmhouse partly out of white wool. The mothers of my future sheep civilization are going to be named Rosa and Simone after two women I admire very much, and we'll go ahead and name the baby Mary. I harvested some cabbages, tomatoes, and all the remaining crops that had grown. To make the crop plot look a bit nicer, I made sure to put one type of plant in each section, though later on I would probably have loads of separate crop plots for each plant. Now I wanted to make my life easier because going caving every single time I need some iron would be quite annoying after some time. So I decided I would build a small iron farm in the village. Once I'd crafted all the items I needed, I of course had to go down caving to get some iron for making a hopper. On my way back up, I also collected a bucket of lava for burning the iron golems, and once the hopper was crafted, it was time to head over to the village to start clearing out the area where we'll be building the farm. I came across the cow I had met on day 1, so I decided to bring her back to the farm, and I also found a bull in the lavender fields, so I brought him back as well, and named the new couple Napoleon and Josephine. And the baby will of course be Napoleon II. I crafted some shears to start gathering up some wool for building, and yeah, honestly it was nice to have a few more animals for company, and I couldn't wait to build them a lovely barn. To end off the day, we're just going to collect some grapes, and we can also enlarge the path connecting the farm to the village. On day 17, I terraformed this area a bit to be sure I would have plenty of workspace for building the iron farm. Now that everything is set up, let's get on with the building. Okay, perfect. We've caught a villager. Only this isn't a villager trap, but an iron farm, so that's not very useful. I went back down to feed the sheep civilization and the descendants of Napoleon, and then I continued working on the iron farm. Now that the farm is complete, I simply have to break the beds and get the villagers inside. Next, we need to get a zombie, and we can simply lure him back and he'll fall into the gap. Okay, so it seems like the farm is working correctly, and we can now get lots of iron without doing anything, which is really awesome. On day 19, I watched this poor, innocent iron golem that simply wanted to defend his villager friends burn so that I could get a few iron ingots. Yeah, it's better not to overthink when playing Minecraft. Back at the farm, it was time to start planning the house, so I started off by tracing the outline of the build. As I wanted to make the lower half out of bricks, I went back to the river to get plenty of clay. I said hello to some otters, and then I headed back to cook all the clay. Next, I sheared all the sheep and fed the cows, and finally I harvested some sugarcane and the rice that had grown. On day 20, I decided to accelerate the resource gathering process, so I set out in the lavender fields to shear every single sheep I could find. I also mined a few blocks of obsidian to be able to craft the enchanting table. I discovered that using a knife on cows made them drop more leather compared to an axe or a sword, so I collected some extra leather as well. Back home, I crafted a bunch of bookshelves as well as an enchanting table, but I realized that I was still missing a small amount of leather, so I headed back out to find a few more cows. Now that I had enough bookshelves, I decided to fill in the floor of the house with dark oak planks to start placing all my stuff inside. I added a bunch of double chests on the side for storage, and I placed some signs on top to make it easier to sort out all my items. On day 22, I set up a little cooking area with my stove and my pan because I was planning on experimenting with recipes once the house was built. I then moved all my stuff to the house chests as well as the enchanting table and all the bookshelves. I started refreshing the table with low enchants until I got Fortune 3 displayed. Now I just need to get my levels up, so let's go mob hunting. Killing mobs for XP was taking too much time, so I decided to mine some ores instead. This was quite handy because I was filling up on coal at the same time, and when the night came, I went strip mining for diamonds again. But instead of finding diamonds, I came across a mineshaft, so I gathered some string from the cobwebs, and I also spotted a chest with some decent loot as well as a new item, the rope. By day 24, the farm was looking a tiny bit nicer, and yes, I'm emphasizing the tiny bit part. And I decided to make use of the rope I'd found, so I set up some fences over the tomato plants, and then I placed some rope so that the plants would grow higher. I also harvested and replanted all my crops and fed my little pig family. I was so happy when I saw that the new baby had a mud-covered belly because it is just so cute. I now was starting to have a decent amount of crops, and I continued collecting wool from the sheep and breeding all the cows. I wanted to get some extra companions on the farm, so I crafted some little straw golems using a hay bale and a carved pumpkin. And yeah, basically you get these adorable little guys that help you harvest your crops. So yeah, of course I just had to craft a bunch because they are so funny and charming. Now I had barely started with these straw golems, but I was already getting some problems. Basically, this guy was determined to go straight and simply would not go around the vineyard, which led to a really funny jumping around. But yeah, I ended up having to cut down some of my grapevines just for that. To make them happy and healthy, I gave them some wheat, and we'll be naming these three guys after the Bee Gees, so we have Barry, Robin, and Maurice. For getting XP fast, I remember that mining quartz was quite effective, so I went to get the remaining obsidian at the broken portal. I sadly didn't have enough to build a nether portal, so I headed down to the very bottom of this ravine to collect some obsidian from this lava lake. Okay, so now it's time to head into the nether. I didn't spawn in an open area, so I had to dig a tunnel until I reached a really cool looking biome with mini volcanoes spitting out puffs of smoke. I straight away started mining all the quartz I could find, and my levels were quickly going up. As soon as I reached level 30, I headed back to the overworld and I enchanted my diamond pickaxe with Fortune 3. So now let's enjoy the diamond mining. I actually didn't get that many diamonds from it because I was only able to craft myself a chestplate and a helmet, so I decided to continue strip mining until I got a full set. On day 28, I realized that Barry was still struggling with the vineyard, so I had to completely remove it. And yeah, he was looking at me as if to say, "I love annoying you, Tootsie." I decided to replant all my grapevines further off, and actually saying grapevine reminds me of a song I like from Marvin Gaye, so I'll probably listen to it later on. Okay, let's get back into topic. With the extra diamonds I had, I was able to craft a diamond axe and a shovel, as well as an extra pickaxe to maybe get a different enchantment on it. I went to feed the sheep civilization, as well as all the descendants of Napoleon and Josephine. And finally, I went back in the nether to mine some quartz. Back at base, I enchanted my shovel with efficiency 4, and I headed straight to the river to collect lots of clay. I also chopped down some logs because the main beams of the house would be out of dark oak, and I also wanted to craft a bunch of fences. I fed the BG some wheat, and I put some stacks of clay to cook. I then grew a bunch of trees for extra wood and crafted a few fences and fence gates. To spend the night, I went to mine quartz in the nether, and when I returned home, I spotted this spider jockey, so I thought it would be wise to sleep this night from higher up, even though this spider did come to bother me, but yeah. I dealt with her. On day 30, I started the morning by watching the jockey burn, and then I went to collect his bone to have extra bone meal. To give a bit of structure, I decided I would fence off the crop plots, and I added some fences over the tomatoes to be able to attach ropes later on. For crafting the latter, I needed to collect some straw that you can obtain from breaking grass with a knife. Once I had the ropes crafted, I started attaching them over the tomato plants, and yeah, the plants look really nice when they grow up the rope. After cooking some extra clay, I noticed that the BGs were sulking on the floor, so I gave them some apples to motivate them again. For the occasion, I grew an apple tree, which would make it easier to collect apples because I knew they were gonna sulk more than once in this video. I got protection 4 on my chest plate, and then I added a row to my vineyard with a bunch of containers at the end for making grape juice. Of course, it was time to do some more grape squishing, and I filled up a few extra wine bottles with grape juice. I then continued creating fenced up plots to make the land a little bit more tidy, and I moved the pigs to one of them until I would build them a special enclosure. I destroyed their old fence because it wasn't aligned with the rest, and then I hoed down one of the plots to plant alternating lines of onions and potatoes. That night, I followed my routine of placing clay in the furnaces and then heading back to the nether to collect levels. On day 32, I gave some apples to the straw golems, and then I started shaving down the hill on one side to get more space for the farm. I suddenly realized I still didn't have any chickens, so I immediately set out to search for some in the fields of barley. So I found some hens and a couple of geese that I brought back, and we're gonna name these guys the Pecky Blinders. So I got everyone into this pen and fed them, and I've got to say the chicks look so adorable. Oh, and by the way, here is a picture of my new editor. Yeah, as you can see, he is a very motivated young man. I then placed some extra ropes on top of the tomato plants because I couldn't do it earlier as the ropes were connecting in a weird way when the plant wasn't already on it. And I think the tomatoes are my favorite of these new crops, although the cabbages look quite awesome as well. Yeah, I'm literally marveling over pixelated plants. Good job, Tootsie. In between each plot, I decided I would shovel down the grass to make some paths, and I also remembered I had some compost lying around, so I went to get it and placed it surrounded by rich soil to start the process of decomposition. I then planted some wheat on the surrounding blocks while I waited for the compost to turn. On day 33, I collected some wood and fed the golems before picking them up and placing them inside their designated crop plots. And yeah, they look pretty funny being carried around like this. It was high time I gotta move on with the house, so I started placing loads of bricks to form the lower wall. I then fed the sheep and set up the area for the rice crops. Oh, and actually I quite like the rice addition too, because planting it directly in the water is quite different from all the rest of the Minecraft crops, and these plants could also be used as pond decorations on top. I went for another trip in the nether and managed to get efficiency 4 Unbreaking 3 and Silk Touch on my axe. The next day, I sadly realized that the floor of my house was a block too high, so I had to completely remove it and place it down again, which was super fun and not at all annoying. I also had to lower down my little kitchen, but as for the chests, there was no way I was going to move all my items again, so I just added an extra row at the bottom. I placed a dark oak door in the entrance, and then I added a layer of dark oak on top of the brick wall to be able to place some stairs all around, which would basically create a separation between the bricks on the lower part and the white of the wool I was about to place. I planted a bunch of saplings nearby to get plenty of wood, and once I was done with the line of stairs, I started working on the top wall made out of wool. When I was done with the walls, I started creating the shape of the roof using dark oak, so here is what it's gonna look like. As I'd been mining at diamond level, I had tons of deep slate, but very little cobblestones, so I decided I would spend the night gathering several stacks for incorporating some in my builds. On day 36, I went to feed the Pecky blinders, and I got some really cute brown chicks, and I was also starting to have a nice variety in the flock. I also went to move the sheep to a new temporary pen while they waited for their barn to be built. I also got some extra wool and removed their old frame to replace it with one the same size as all the other ones, and then I bought in all the cows. I added a few torches here and there and also extended the path all around. I went mining for quartz one more time and enchanted my bow with infinity, which is probably one of my favorite enchantments because of how useful it is. Now, day 37. We need to continue that farmhouse. I keep getting distracted. So we're basically gonna repeat the same roof shape on all the sides of the house. Here we can add some walls and fences to add detail in each corner. For the inside, we'll be using some dark oak to separate the first and second floor. And finally, we can finish up the top walls by filling them in with wool. I put up a few lanterns, and then I worked a bit on enlarging the kitchen area, and I even crafted a cooking pot to be able to cook a variety of different recipes. And honestly, these pans and cooking pots really decorate the kitchen well. I finished up the night by adding small tables with lanterns and plant pots on top. On day 38, I harvested some rice and I replanted it to gradually fill up every spot. I also brought some back to the house with me to cook my very first recipe, mushroom rice. I decided to place a pan on top of a campfire to get the cozy effect of watching the fire burning, and I also crafted this cool chopping board on which I could place my knife. Now, to prepare my very first feast, I cooked some chicken over the fire, and then with a few extra ingredients, we have this tasty roast chicken platter that you can actually place down on the countertop. Yeah, this is pretty cool. I went to gather some more logs, collected some grapes, and then placed a grapevine pot near the kitchen to be able to satisfy my grape squishing urges in the comfort of my own home. I had a look at all the different things you could craft, so I got some of these wine bottle storage boxes as well as some aging barrels to be able to finally make wine out of the juice I got. So yeah, I can place my wine bottles on these to store them, and I can of course drink them as well, and I believe there are different wine types you can make with specific ingredients, and they can give you effects similar to potions. Oh, and obviously I had to craft myself the iconic straw hat because it's well known that you cannot be a farmer if you're not wearing a straw hat. For storing your crops, you can actually place them in a crafting table and make a bag of grapes, for example. I also decided to craft a supply cart for transporting some stuff around, and I also made a plow because I thought it would look cool on the farm. And yeah, here is Farmer Tootsie sitting in her little supply cart. I added a few more grapevine pots, and I also crafted some storage baskets full of all the crops I had, and I then placed these baskets everywhere on the farm and even in some of the animal enclosures because I thought it would make them slightly nicer until I built their dedicated homes. So yeah, gradually we're getting more and more that farm vibe, which is quite nice. And I also decided to use some poppies to make red dye for crafting a winemaker apron. And yeah, I look quite silly with my diamond armor still on, but I guess this can be a fashion statement, although obviously a terrible one. I placed down the plow as well as the supply cart, and then I decided to add a little wall around the vineyard made out of dark oak and cobblestone. Okay guys, it's high time we get a horse companion, so let's go farm some leather for crafting a saddle. Of course, I got distracted again, so here basically I was testing out some large pots in which you can plant regular seeds, and I mean it's quite fun because you can see the plant growing inside. I had a quick munch on some mushroom rice, and then I set out to find the nice horse I'd spotted on the very first day, and do you know what? We're going to name him Lando. We headed back home and I attached Lando to the supply cart, and off we went for a mini bonding adventure. I gathered up some wild cabbage, and then we entered a lovely autumn-covered forest with foxes running around, and I soon spotted some wolves roaming about, so the urge to tame them was so big that I decided to spend the night there. I let Lando enjoy some grass while I went out to meet the wolves. I spotted a pack already attacking a skeleton, so all I had to do was collect the bones. I managed to tame this grey one, and I named him Martin after Martin Luther King. I then followed some wolves attacking another skeleton, and I let Martin finish him off because I was scared I would accidentally hit him with an arrow. I also tamed a second wolf that was black with lovely yellow eyes, and I named him Charles after Charles Darwin. I killed off a few extra mobs and tried taming this lovely white wolf, but I was unsuccessful. I accidentally hit Martin with an arrow, so I quickly gave him some rotten flesh, and I did the same for Charles, and they actually had a white-colored baby that I named Amelia. On day 41, it was time to head back, so I filled up the supply cart with stuff, and we made our way across the river and through the lavender field. Once we arrived at the house, I sat down all the dogs by the entrance, and I left Lando attached to the cart so that he wouldn't wander off. I then wanted to finish decorating the house, so I added some windows on the bottom layer with flower pots in front, and I planted some lavender in them. On day 42, Lando and I went to collect some barley and some oak leaves for decorating the upper part of the farmhouse. So I added some more dark oak logs at the bottom, and then I made a large window in the center to have a nice view of the scenery. At the very top, we're also going to have a slightly smaller window because I'm planning on having 3 floors in total. So here is the finished result, and we're just gonna finish off the roof and add some campfires to make a nice smoky chimney. And I guess we have a cool view of the farm from up here. On day 43, I got some extra wood to finish building the floor on the 3rd level. And finally, I added a bit of granite to add a bit of texture and contrast in the brick. And yeah, we are now officially done with the farmhouse. I came back to my compost that I admit I had totally forgotten about, and it had turned into rich soil, so I planted a bunch of wheat seeds on it. Next, I fed the Pecky Blinders with the wheat seeds I had just collected, and I also picked some tomatoes to feed the pig family, and they all seemed quite happy about that. The sheep colony had definitely become a full-blown civilization, and to be fair, the cows weren't that far off either. There was a thunderstorm in the afternoon, so I simply harvested the rice and also separated the onions from the potatoes in 2 separate crop plots. On the morning of day 44, I added some grapevines onto an extra row and collected some grapes to make juice. Okay, I admit, I think the Bee Gees all died during the thunderstorm because they take damage from water, so yeah, this is the Bee Gees part 2. On the side close to the river, I started working on 2 more crop plots, and I decided to incorporate some cobblestone walls in the fence as well to have a bit of contrast, and also combined with with fence gates, it gave a nice wavy shape as well. Inside, I decided to plant some rows of pumpkins, and in the second one we'll have some melons. Here we can also fill in the holes to be able to make a pathway going all around. That night, I decided I would prepare myself a hearty meal, so I chopped up some beef for making minced meat, and I added some carrots and potatoes in the cooking pot to get a lovely warm beef stew. I then combined some onions, carrots, rice, and an egg to make some fried rice. On day 46, I bone mealed and chopped down a few trees, and I also decided to replace the fence I'd built around the vineyard with a full cobblestone one instead. I then added a little entrance and I extended the path towards it. On day 47, I started by terraforming the terrain a bit more, and then I had a look at the farm to see what we could add next. I of course went to feed the sulking Bee Gees that actually spent more time sulking than collecting crops, and then I went to harvest all my rice. My shovel was running quite low on health, so I needed to get a mending book from a villager, so I collected some leather to craft a lectern, and I also crafted a fletching table because I was planning on trading sticks for emeralds with a fletcher. I suddenly spotted Lando in the distance and I realized I probably forgot to attach him to the cart, so I went to get him and I made sure he was securely attached this time around. For trading, I decided I would chop down these really tall trees because I could collect more wood faster compared to regular trees. I then headed back up to the village to trade with the fletcher. On day 49, I went to shear the sheep while I waited for the fletcher's trades to refresh, and then I traded with him again until I got enough emeralds to get my first mending book. I also collected some iron ingots from the iron farm, and then Lando and I went back to base. With all the iron I had, I was easily able to craft an anvil, and I paired my shovel with the mending book to be able to repair it. To do so, I simply went back into the nether to mine some quartz. Okay, so we are halfway through, and today I enchanted a second shovel with Unbreaking 3, and I was able to merge it with my other shovel so that it would lose health much slower. My pickaxe was also low on health, so I went back to trade with the fletcher, and when I ran out of sticks, I rode back to the forest with Lando to collect some extra wood. Back at the village, I randomly decided to breed the villagers. I guess in case one gets killed, I'll still have the baby around. While I was waiting for the fletcher to refresh his trades, I decided I would work a bit more on the interior decoration, so I crafted a bunch of campfires, pots, and item frames to basically set up a cute and cozy sleeping area on the second floor. So yeah, here is the finished result, and I'm sure I will sleep in it very well. Repeatedly going in the nether to mine quartz for levels was getting a bit annoying, so I realized that I could make an XP farm out of the cave spider spawner I'd found in the mineshaft. So I quickly made my way down and I started removing all the cobwebs that were around it using my knife. The next morning, I continued trading with the fletcher and I managed to get enough emeralds to get a second mending book. I returned to the farmhouse and I put mending on the pickaxe. Now that I was able to repair my tools, I went back to the hill I'd been flattening out previously to continue terraforming. That night, I went back down to the spider spawner and started clearing out the area all around it and build the farm. Yeah, I actually found some diamonds while making the farm, so that was quite nice. Okay, so we've got the farm all done, and for the occasion, I'm going to craft a diamond sword because it has sweeping edge on it, and it'll be more practical for farming the spiders. On day 53, it was time to do some extra decorating, so I used a few barrels and some chests to make this little storage cupboard underneath the window. I also added a few white carpets around the place, and I went to harvest some of my fields, and gave some apples to the straw golems, even though I knew they wouldn't be doing much anyway. Which is weird because in my previous farm 100 days, the straw golems were actually quite helpful, but maybe I missed something here because wheat and apples simply don't seem to do much. I also went to feed the pecky blinders, collected some rice, and checked on the cows and sheep. I gave a quick hello to the pig family, and I also bred my dogs. I managed to get this adorable brown baby that we're gonna name Elizabeth. I put a few potatoes to fry and crafted a second stove, and for tonight's dinner, I guess we'll be having steak and potatoes. It was finally time to start building the animal barn for the cows and sheep, so I went out to start clearing the barley fields just behind the house. Once that was done, I started digging up the hill to make a bit more space for building, and I filled up any holes in the ground. That night, I set out with Lando to collect some more wood in the autumn forest, and when we came back home, I thought it would be cool to get my own dog in the game. So I crafted a special treat which basically transforms wolves into dogs. And of course, I chose the German Shepherd skin. We're gonna name this young lady Una, just like my own puppy. Oh, and by the way, here are a few pictures of my real life Una. And of course, I had to show you the city ones. So yeah, honestly, it's really nice having Una in my Minecraft world as well. That night, I added some more decorations, so I made this dark oak storage space, and then underneath the window, I built a little table with a grate planted on the side, and I even ended up putting trapdoors all around it with 2 more chests. On each side of that window, I made 2 extra tables out of oak because I wanted to contrast a bit with lighter colors. And finally on top, I placed some pots with lavender and lanterns, as well as red mushrooms. It was finally time to start building the barn. So first off, we can build the main columns using dark oak logs. I then added some trapdoors up along the side with upside down stairs at the top to create a small arch. Next, we can work on the roof. So I'm using a mix of slabs and stairs to follow the shape of the columns already in place. So the barn design is inspired by frog crafting, and here is what the front looks like for the moment. For filling in the walls, we'll be using some wool, a bit like the house, because I want all the builds on the farm to fit well together with a similar theme. At this point, I discovered the basket and proceeded to place random baskets everywhere in my house. I went to collect some extra wool as well as apples for the straw golems, but as it was raining, they were really having a bad time and shivering in the cold, so I gave them some wheat to heal them a bit. I harvested some rice, which is actually a really satisfying crop to break for some reason, and then I headed over to the barn and placed down some wool to fill in the walls. That night, I was about to head out with Lando when we noticed this lost straw golem, so I picked him up and I brought the little guy back to the melon plot and I gave him a couple of apples. After that, I rejoined Lando and we went for a little stroll in the forest, and I also popped into the river to have a look for some extra clay because I needed some more for building the barn roof. Once I had collected a good amount, we made our way back to the farm and I went to collect some eggs to cook some fried rice for dinner. The 3rd floor was still empty, so I went up to make a cozy little fireplace using some bricks to match with the chimney we can see from the outside. And I placed 2 campfires inside, protected by some iron bars so that the dogs wouldn't accidentally burn themselves. And finally, as an extra detail, I placed some put-out campfires to have some extra logs for the chimney. I went out to collect some wool for the millionth time in this video, and then I went to work on the brick roof, which would of course match the farmhouse's lower wall. I decided I would spend time with the dogs, so we set off all together to find some more clay. I then thought it would be nice to have a little adventure with Una, so we went out to explore a bit and she traveled along with me in the boat, which was quite cute. I had some fried rice for lunch and then we spotted a cherry tree in the distance, so I picked up a few cherries and I got some cherry wood to be able to craft furniture later on. I decided to go back to the jungle I'd spotted earlier on in the video to look for some jungle grapes, but instead I found some white grapes that I didn't already have, so I collected plenty of seeds for planting in my vineyard. I also came across a few horses and admired them for a bit. Yeah, just Tootsie being Tootsie, I guess. And that's when I spotted a strange vine in the sparse jungle biome. So I broke it and nothing dropped. So yeah, I made sure to use shears on the next one. And I even found red jungle grapes as well, so I'll be able to make some new wine types and decorate my farm with them. On day 62, Una and I started making our way back, But then we spotted this little donkey in a field, so of course, what did Tootsie do? She had to tame the donkey, of course. So I'm gonna name this little guy a William after Shakespeare. Yeah, this guy is quite cute, guys. William, Una and I headed back, and I thought everything was gonna go smoothly, but no, we fell into a ravine. I made a little staircase and I managed to get William out, and of course I excused myself for not looking where I was going. Finally, we arrived back safe and sound, and I attached William to the plow, but don't worry guys, I will be building a stable for Lando and William later on so that they'll be more comfortable. I then took the grape seeds I'd got and planted some on the walls, and I finished off the day by continuing the barn roof, and I also crafted some of the new furniture using cherry wood, so I was able to craft a table and some shelves, as well as little dark oak cabinets that I placed down around the house. I also added these really nice chairs around the tables, so yeah, this will be my dining area on the top floor next to the fireplace. On day 63, I finally completed the barn roof, and I also filled up the back wall with wool and started fencing up the two different sides to have a separation between the cows and the sheep. As space in the barn was a bit tight, I also decided to clear up the sides for the animals to have an open area as well. That night, Una came to snuggle up with me, and it was literally the sweetest thing ever. On day 64, I said hello to Una and Charles, and then Lando and I went to the top of the hill to be able to see what the barn looked like. And yeah, it fit really well with the farmhouse and all the crop fields in front. We then had a look around for a beehive that I picked up with my axe because it had silk touch, and basically I want to use the honey to craft a special type of wine. So then I started experimenting with the aging barrel, and I managed to get some cherry wine, but I couldn't figure out why I couldn't use up the honey as well. I placed down a bunch of botany pots on the third floor, and I planted a bunch of different seeds because I thought it would be nice to have crops even inside the house, because we are spending 100 days building a farm after all, so we might as well have crops everywhere. On day 65, I fenced up the areas I'd cleared on the sides of the barn, and I also harvested some jungle grapes and added white grapes to my vineyard. I then had a bit of fun making red and white jungle grape juice, and that's when I figured out I actually needed jungle grapes to be able to use up the honey. And I made this really fancy wine with it, and using an iron ingot, I also made some magnetic wine. Yeah, I doubt people use iron for making wine in real life. Well, at least I really hope so. Both wine bottles looked quite elegant, so I placed the magnetic wine on the aging barrel, and the other bottle I reserved specially for the upstairs dining table. Finally, to end off the day on a good note, I snuggled up in bed with Una. On day 66, I made a path coming out of the barn, and I even discovered you can craft slabs out of dirt, which seems like such an illegal block, but to be fair, it is quite handy, so fingers crossed it will one day be added to Minecraft. I then added some grass in both enclosures, and then it was time to bring all the animals over, so I started with the cows and I brought over their cauldron and some hay bales to add to their paddock. I then brought over the enormous amount of sheep, and yeah, it was a bit of a struggle to get them all in, but I managed by opening several of the fence gates. I also gave them some water and some hay, and there we have it. We've got all the cows and the sheep settled in their new barn. I harvested some more jungle grapes, and then I started hoeing down the old animal pens to add crops instead. On day 67, I replaced the sheep pen with a cabbage field, and then I went back to digging up the hillside because I was planning on making the pig and the chicken enclosures on top. There was quite a lot to do, so I was still at it by the next morning. Yeah, all this terraforming business is taking quite some time, so let's have a quick fact on the history of farming. So agriculture began independently in different parts of the globe about 12,000 years ago, and it changed the way humans humans lived. They basically switched from nomadic, hunter-gatherer lifestyles to permanent settlements and farming. Pigs were domesticated in Mesopotamia around 11 years ago, followed by sheep. On the other hand, cows were domesticated from the wild aurochs in the areas of modern Turkey and India around 8500 BC. So the wandering trader spawned, but he didn't have any good trades, so I got rid of him and I attached his llamas further off so that they couldn't spit at me. On day 69, I still needed to remove all that stone and replace it with dirt. Once I was finally done with the terrain, it was time to build the pig enclosure. For that, I started by tracing the outline with cobblestone, and then I placed some slabs on top to prevent the pigs from jumping out. And here is what the cobblestone wall looks like. On day 70, it was time to bring all the bouncy pigs into their larger enclosure. So yeah, they happily bounced all around me and it was quite cute. Once they were inside, I fed them and I went to get their vegetable baskets and their water cauldron. Oh, and by the way, I ended up using the rich soil for the pig pen because I thought it looked a bit like mud. Once again, Tootsie not using the mods the right way. I added a little archway for the entrance of the pen, like that we can see the pigs scurrying about. I placed all their stuff and I even made some extra tomato baskets because I knew how much they loved them. I of course bone mealed the ground and planted some barley and lavender to give a bit of extra color. So yeah, here we have the pig enclosure all done, and next we'll be doing the pecky blinders. I then went to bed and I of course had Una nearby. Oh, and guess what? The real Una is lying down next to me at this very moment, and I'm sure she's very happy to be in the video as well. The next morning, I set out with Lando to chop down some wood for building the chicken coop. I decided to change things up a bit because I would be using oak planks for the walls, which would make the coop look quite different to the house and the barn, for example, but I'll still be making a brick and dark oak roof nonetheless to have some colors in common. It is estimated that the chicken was domesticated 8,000 years ago in Southeast Asia and then spread to China and India 2,000 to 3,000 years later. As you know, Charles Darwin is a very famous biologist, and he actually studied pigeons because he suspected that the environment might naturally manipulate species, causing them to change over time. But he couldn't find a way to effectively explore this in the wild. So he decided to artificially select pigeons with particular characteristics to generate different offspring. And basically, this helped him gather valuable evidence for evolution by natural selection. Okay, so there we have the chicken coop with a little staircase for the chickens to climb up. And all around, I'm going to fence up a large area for them to run around and search for worms and insects. I went to pick some apples off the apple tree and I fed the straw golems. I then finished building the chicken fence and added some fence gates as well. And then chaos was unleashed upon the farm when I opened the chicken fence. Yeah, we do have a good amount of birds right here, but let's go ahead and breed them one more time. So yeah, we are done with the little chicken habitat. I placed down some vegetable crates as well as their cauldron and some hay bales for them to climb onto. I also placed down some barley here and there, which is another plant I find really nice, and it gives a good farm vibe as well. Okay, so we have all the farm animals settled in their respective enclosures, and I'm glad to say the Tootsie farm finally does look like a farm. Now we can add a path in between the pigs and the pecky blinders, and finally I'm going to transform their old pens into crop fields as well. And now let's head back to the house to snuggle up in bed with my pups. On day 75 I planted some cabbages where the pigs used to be, and then I put some carrots in the old pecky blinders pen. I said a quick hello to Thomas Shelby, and then I went to fill up the entrance of the ravine that was on the side of my house because we're going to build an awesome windmill. With all that terraforming, I really needed to go repair my tools, so I headed down to the cave spider farm to collect plenty of XP. The next day I made my way back up to the surface and I got Lando out again to get some wood for building the windmill, and as soon as we returned home I went to the barn once again to shear all the sheep because I was going to use some white wool for the walls. If only the sheep knew that I was building houses with their own hair, I doubt they'd be very happy. Or maybe they'd find it cool, but no idea. So to start off, we're going to use cobblestone to make a circle, and we can make this outline 2 blocks high. Next, I crafted some oak stairs to make a small staircase going up, and finally, I filled up the floor with oak planks. And we can also add some upside down stairs all around the circle as well. Now let's move on to building the windmill's dark oak columns, and we can connect them all using white wool. While we're building, let's talk about windmills a bit more. So basically, they can convert wind power into rotational energy. Windmills are actually a popular tourist attraction in the Netherlands. Historically, the most essential function of windmills in Holland was to pump water out of the lowlands and then back into rivers so that the land could be farmed. Later on, they were also used for things such as making paint, sawing tree trunks, and pressing oil. So I finished off the windmill by adding a dark oak roof, and now all that was missing were the actual blades that turn in the wind. So I thought white blades would look nice, so we're gonna use wool once again, so it's time for yet another trip to the barn. Next, we can build the part in the center that connects all the blades together, so for that we'll be using some grindstones. Next, we can decorate each window by placing some plant pots underneath with some lavender, barley, and leaves in them. I also added some vegetation on the lower part of the build to give that extra farm look, of course, and there we have a view of the windmill, and it really adds a lot to the farm. It was time to remove the temporary blocks I used to help me build, and then I added some hay bales and barrels to make it look as if I was storing all my grains inside, for example. I then went to harvest all my rice and I put a large amount on to cook. Okay, it's now time to make a proper home for Lando and William. So for that, we need to start clearing out the whole side of this hill. I find the evolution of species quite fascinating. So let's have a look at how the horse evolved into what it is today. The early ancestors of the modern horse walked on several spread out toes, which was an accommodation to life spent walking on the soft, moist ground of primeval forests. When steps began to appear, a natural selection favored increase in speed to outrun predators. This ability was attained by the limbs being lengthened, and some of the toes were lifted off the ground in such a way that the weight of the body was gradually placed on one of the longest toes, which is why horses today have long legs to be able to gallop very fast and a single hoof at the end of each. In the evening, I went to repair my shovel to be able to continue digging the next day. On day 82, I finished preparing the terrain, and then I took Lando with me to collect some oak logs as well as some spruce for his soon-to-be new home. I came across a couple of adorable spotted bunnies, and this made me want to welcome rabbits on the farm as well. We then returned to the Tootsie farm, and I put Lando right here so that he could watch his stable slowly come to life. So as usual, we're going to start off with the columns, because obviously we're not going to start with the roof. And now I'm wondering if maybe in the past I did start with the roof. Yeah, I'm always very good at doing weird things, so that wouldn't surprise me. On day 83, I worked on the oak beams going all around, and then in each section, I created a small arch using some spruce stairs and trapdoors. Once that was done, I started working on the roof, so for that we'll be using some dark oak slabs, and we'll create this little wavy pattern on each section. So this is what we have for the moment, and we can add some lanterns at the top of every arch. And finally, let's fill the rest of the roof with spruce slabs. And just an extra fact, mares tend to give birth to their fall late at night or early in the morning because it's the most tranquil time of the day with the least intrusions. In the wild, mares typically give birth when it's dark to hide their vulnerable foals for the next few hours until they become physically able to rise and flee from predators. So yeah, here is the horse stable all done, but as you may have noticed, I added 3 extra slots because we're going to get 3 more horses. On my way, I spotted the adorable cuttlefish and I picked her up in a bucket. Honestly, I have no clue why. I then found a group of horses and I decided to tame this brown and white one. I think we're gonna name you after Jane Austen. So Jane and I set off in search of some more horses. We soon found the mare I had promised to come back for on day 5. Then I decided to name Anne, and we also spotted a lovely stallion with a gorgeous white nose and 4 high-fitted white socks that I named Abraham. And now it was time to bring everyone back, but it was actually super long and annoying because the lead kept breaking every 30 seconds, so we were still at it by the next morning. Thankfully, I managed not to fall into a ravine this time around. And soon enough, we made it back to the stable, and I brought in Abraham as well as Anne so that they could rest after their long journey. I also welcomed Jane, Lando, and little William to their respective boxes. I have to say, I really love having the horses on the farm. And you know what? Let's have a go at breeding them. So first I bred Jane and William to get this adorable baby mule. But on the other hand, when I tried breeding Anne and Abraham, I ended up just feeding them golden carrots because I'd forgotten to tame them beforehand. For some reason it took me ages to tame them, but finally I managed. And this time around, we welcomed a sweet little foal with a white patch on the forehead and tiny little white socks. So yeah, he clearly took from his dad, although he did have a tiny bit of brown from his mum as well. We'll be naming the little guy Alexander, and I'll put him in with his mother for the moment. That night I finished fencing up an outdoor field for them, and while I was decorating I noticed there was an intruder, so I quickly took care of him, and then it was time to let everyone out of their boxes to munch on some grass. I decided I would just leave all the boxes open so that everyone could wander in and out when they felt like it, and we had each family together, and I guess Lando was just the friendly uncle. I admired the stable and the farm for a bit, and then I took the unsurprising decision of welcoming rabbits to the farm because, if you don't already know, I actually have pet rabbits at home that I'm very fond of, so yeah, we definitely need bunnies on the Tootsie farm. I had a quick look where I'd seen the spotted bunnies, but for some reason I couldn't find them, so I continued searching through the forest. Yeah, here we actually have a really nice view of the farm across the river, which is nice. Yeah, you're not a bunny, mister. I'm sorry to tell you. There we go, finally a real bunny. Oh, and the moving nose is actually quite realistic, and it's a pretty cute detail. I also found a full black bunny that really reminded me of my bunny Pepper, although my Pepper has ears that flop down. So obviously we'll have to name the black bunny Pepper, and for the black and white one, let's go for Frida. I didn't have an enclosure for them yet, so for the time being, I guess they'll be staying inside the windmill. I gave them some carrots, and they had a tiny light brown baby that I named Chocolate. Yeah, they can't all have names after important figures of history. So we'll be making the rabbit habitat on the hill just behind the animal barn, so I guess you know what we have to do. Terraform, of course. I finished off clearing the area, and on day 89 it was soon time to start building the rabbit hutch. For the block palette, I'll be using some dark oak, wool, and bricks, exactly like the house and the barn, to of course stay in the overall theme. So this might surprise some of you, but rabbits are actually very intelligent creatures. Some breeds are even trainable, they come when called, and you can teach them some fun tricks like you would for a dog. Rabbits also have a very good memory, and they don't forget negative experiences and emotions easily. On day 90, I collected some wool for the walls of the hutch, and then I went to the horse stable to tame Alexander, and we wandered through the fields of barley until we reached a river, and I jumped in to gather some more clay because I'd already dug up all the clay that was in the river near the farm. Once I had enough, I hopped back onto Alexander's back, and we headed home. I then went up to the hutch and filled up the walls with white wool, and I also worked on the roof, filling in the gaps with spruce stairs. I also crafted some more bricks and filled up the top part of the wall with them. On day 92, I finished off the outer part of the hutch by decorating with plant pots and bushes, and then I started placing some brick walls all along the area I had cleared, and I topped it with some spruce fences because rabbits can jump over a single fence but not over 2 block high fences. I also added a second floor to the hutch with a little staircase going up to it. Now that the fence is all done, we can shovel down the grass a bit for extra detail. And we can add some barley as well as a few crop plots with carrots planted in them. I then went over to the windmill and lured the rabbits towards their new enclosure. I then decided to breed the bunnies and I got this full white one that I named Snowflake. Yeah, it's a very original name, of course. And here is what the rabbit hutch and the rest of the farm looks like from the top of the hill. I went to collect plenty of red and white grapes to make loads of juice. I thought it would be nice to have a second vineyard perched on top of the hill, so I started clearing out an area just above the rabbits. I then went to repair my shovel at the spider farm, and then on day 94 I placed down a bunch of grapevine logs diagonally to make it look a bit different in comparison to my other vineyard. I placed the grape seeds on top, and then I went to get Alexander to go chop down some trees for crafting more grapevine logs. When I came back to the farm, I realized I couldn't craft them using the new wood types, so I had to make the entire way back to the forest to get some oak logs this time around. I then placed down a bunch to fill in the gaps, and then I brought Alexander back to his parents. I needed to get some more grape seeds for the vineyard, so I started eating a bunch of grapes because you sometimes get seeds from them. On day 96, I added a row of grapes, and then I went to make some grape juice. I was able to make some more cherry wine as well as the fancy wine using honey, and of course I drank some to celebrate the farm being almost complete. I also decided I would do some cooking, so I started collecting some ingredients all over the farm. I put some potatoes to fry and chopped up some mutton, and finally combined all the ingredients to make some tasty shepherd's pie. It was time to inaugurate the dining table, so I sat down and gobbled up some of the pie. On the morning of day 97, I had a little walk around the farm so that you guys can have a proper look at it. I then decided it would be nice to have a cat companion, so I went to get some salmon in the river, and then I found this little red and white cat that I named Victoria. I brought her back to the farmhouse with me and sat her down by the entrance. I then saddled up Abraham and we went on a mini adventure through the forest. We soon came across a village perched on top of a small island, so I swam over and I collected a few berries. We then headed home, but this time I took Anne with me so that Abraham could rest a bit. We made a quick stop so that I could collect some kelp and some fish because I was planning on making some sushi later on. We then headed over to the plains biome because I wanted to get some more grape seeds for the second vineyard. That night, Anne decided to walk on me while I was sleeping, which was slightly painful on the tummy. On day 99, we spotted a mangrove with some brand new grapes in front, Savannah grapes. We also spotted another cat, so I decided to tame him and I named him Gandhi. We then found some more Savannah grapes, and I've got to say they look a lot like azalea bushes. In the evening, we finally arrived back home with Anne, and I presented Gandhi to Victoria. On day 100, I went up to the vineyard and planted the Savannah grapes, which actually look really cool planted on the wood poles. I also filled up all the remaining gaps until the vineyard was complete. Now it's time for some cooking, so first we can prepare this awesome sushi platter using some kelp, cod, and salmon rolls, and next we can make some stuffed pumpkin with vegetables, berries and rice, and it actually looks really nice placed down as well. Finally, we can make the last feast, which is honey glazed ham, and we will obviously need ham and honey as well as rice and berries. Finally, we were done with this farming adventure, so I decided to gather up all my pets and we went around the farm to see all the animals. In the evening, the moon rose above the farm, and I decided to drink some of the magnetic wine, which basically makes you collect items that are farther away from you. So of course I had a bit of fun with that, even though I just looked really silly, randomly throwing stuff in the air. And there we have it, 100 days building a farm. Thank you so much for watching the video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it. And I have to admit, I really love making videos with animals, much more than the ones without. So don't worry, guys, there will be plenty more to come. I guess I will see you in the next video. Love you!